my friends, whether you are tuned in on this wavelength or not, or whether you have realized it or not, nearly everything we do, everything we are, everything around us is pure energy. Main source of it, right up there. And whether we're in our own body or whatever we're consuming, or if we're in discussions with people, that's the main thing I want to discuss, is that in a discussion, in an argument, in any sort of thing between one or another, there's an exchange of energy taking place between you and the other person, or the crowd, however many people there are. But for the instance of one person to another, there are four main ways in which energy is exchanged between one another, or ways in which a person tries to acquire energy. These patterns are done subconsciously. Basically, ways that we learned as a young individual from our parents, from our friends, from pretty early on, that however we manipulated energy, however we sought to live. We have it to fulfill our needs. The first of the four is the interrogator. This is somebody that tends to want to probe, ask a lot of questions, with not really an exact ending for what they're trying to get to, but they're trying to get the other person to ask questions subliminally, and then get to a point where they can trigger the other person to notice that there's something wrong on their end, and it makes them feel a certain way. So the person asking questions gets that hit of energy, gets that hit of dopamine, gets that hit of satisfaction that they were able to get something out of somebody that they weren't comfortable talking about. But that's one of the main methods. Second one is the intimidator. This person tends to be very aggressive in their actions, being forceful for things, maybe, yelling, high energy, right? So in turn, the people that are listening or around focuses their energy onto that person and makes them, second guess their actions, their motives, and it almost makes them, feed into them, because, oh, this person's coming at me so strongly, and now I have to kind of like be passive and not match them if they're able to stand up to that same level. So the intimidator is very aggressive. This is going from most aggressive to most passive. Most aggressive would be the intimidator, then the interrogator. And so the third one here is going to be the poor me attitude, the poor me, agenda that they have. They want to project out that, woe is me, these things are wrong, I'm sort of having a tough time. It's basically a victim consciousness. You're a victim state. You're exclaiming that everything is wrong and these things. And so when they're having that sort of experience and they're discussing that, they're subconsciously putting that energy on the person they're talking to get them to feel bad for them. So it's like literally, as they're doing that, they're sucking the energy out of the other person and has them in this sort of trance that, without even thinking more clearly or subconsciously, that person will start to feel bad for them, or start to think of specific ways that they can, like, they feel like they're in the wrong and that they want to somehow make it better for them. So the fourth one is acting aloof. And this is the most, maybe coincides with the poor me one, but acting aloof is being very cautious, being very quiet in the way that you carry yourself, in the way that you in conversation. So you're very standoffish and you let things kind of unfold, but you want the other, subconsciously, you want the other person to kind of probe you, to ask questions, to get, like, to be mysterious, you know? It's just acting very mysterious, acting very, like, stepping back and letting people kind of come to you and letting, like, unconsciously, like, you want these people to be asking you questions. And this, you see, by acting this way, you may naturally bring interrogators to you, right? Because you're acting aloof, you're standing back, but at the same time you have people wanting to interrogate and, you know, ask all these probing questions. And then it gets to the point where they ask you some question that you're not ready for, and then that, you know, it's just, like I said, it's the whole fluctuation of energy back and forth. And so those are kind of the 4 main ways here, and it's a very common play. It's gone on for, you know, as long as we've been able to communicate. And, you know, the main point on this is that every person, every interaction, no matter how simple, everybody's seeking subconsciously, for the most part, to gain energy from another person, you know. In the case of the intimidator, I mean, maybe that's a little bit more extreme, but those are the kind of the 4 main methods that we subconsciously been led to based on survival patterns, based on, you know, how we conducted ourselves in, you know, preschool and elementary school, like, because we had to survive, right? And in order for us to get our needs and be able to survive in this state, we had to develop ways in which we could get our energy, you know, find meaning to things and be able to continue on and keep going. And there's more extremes to this. You know, some people tend to be like a void, you know, an empty void, an empty space where all they want to do is suck energy and keep going, right? They're an empty pit. No amount will satisfy them, at least long term. You know, short term, they'll be able to get things based on that. But that's really the whole play, you know. And based on these, whichever one of the 4, I call them, or I've heard that they are controlled dramas. They're ways in which, you know, that we've been developed and led. So whichever one of the 4 that seem to make the most sense to you, that's likely where you depended on for your survival at a very young, early age, subconsciously, right? And it could be a mixture. So think about this. Think about relations who you had early on. Think about the people that you looked up to very early, and see what kind of pattern that you were into and how that has shaped your character at this point in time. So if you can recognize this subconsciously, that will be a first major shift. Just bringing it to awareness. You take this, and then you can improve and kind of catch things that may be coming into your to your field. All right. Let me know how this resonates, how this sits, and wish you well.